I was fired before my coffee went cold, and the irony was I was still listed as the compliance architect on a $4.2 billion deal the company legally couldn't close without me. That's not metaphor. That's a filing number, a timestamp, and a regulator's email sitting in my archive right now. But I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew, standing in the lobby of Veiled Dynamics at 8:41 a.m. on what was supposed to be the most important first day of my career, was that the security badge clipped to my jacket suddenly felt heavier than it should have, like it already knew it wouldn't work by lunchtime. I'd been recruited quietly. No LinkedIn announcement, no welcome all email. The CEO, Richard Vail himself, had called me 3 months earlier from a private number, his voice low and precise, like a man used to not being overheard. "Daniel," he'd said, "this deal dies if it leaks. I need someone who understands silence as well as structure." 4 months of encrypted calls, redlined drafts sent at 3 a.m. Brussels time, antitrust modeling that took entire weekends. By the time I walked into that building, I knew the European target's cap table better than their own CFO did. I knew which subsidiary triggered German competition law and which shell entity was going to make or break U.S. approval. This wasn't just another transaction. The equity clause alone, buried on page 62 of my contract, was worth $38 million if the deal closed. Generational money. And I was about to lose all of it before the elevators hit the executive floor. The first sign something was off was the receptionist. She smiled too late. Not rude, just delayed. Like her screen had told her something her mouth hadn't caught up with yet. "Name?" she asked. "Daniel Mercer." Her fingers froze, just for a beat. Then she nodded, handed me a temporary badge, white instead of blue, and said, "They're expecting you. Conference room E." Not the executive boardroom, not the glass horseshoe on 42. Conference room E was internal use only. No windows, no camera. The kind of room HR liked. I told myself it was nothing. Companies this size misfire all the time. Process lag, onboarding glitches. I'd spent 14 years smoothing over worse. Inside, the room smelled like dry erase markers and burnt coffee. The table was already half full. VPs, legal, finance, people I recognized from deal calls, people who'd deferred to me 3 days earlier. And then there was her. Cassandra Vail didn't look up when I walked in. She sat at the head of the table, legs crossed, tablet propped at a perfect angle. Her blazer was expensive in a way that didn't want to be noticed. Soft gray, minimalist, the kind of outfit that said authority without ever earning it. "Let's get started," she said, without introduction. I took a seat halfway down the table and opened my laptop. The slide deck was already queued. My deck. 47 slides, clean Helvetica New headers, compliance annotations in the footer, cross-reference to EU directive numbers. I made it through exactly 2 sentences. As you'll see on slide 3, the antitrust exposure hinges on how we classify. "Sorry," Cassandra cut in, finally looking at me. Her smile was polite, surgical. "Before we proceed, I need clarification." She tapped her tablet once. "Why does an external contractor have access to board-level confidential materials?" The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Someone cleared their throat. I felt it then, that drop in the stomach you only get when you realize a conversation has been happening without you. "I'm not a contractor," I said evenly. "I'm on a contract to executive track, approved by Richard." "I'm aware of your arrangement," she replied. "However, Strategic Operations has implemented an internal governance update." She turned the tablet so the table could see. A single paragraph, no header, no version number. "Effective immediately, external hires must undergo a 90-day internal review before participating in board-level negotiations." I scanned the text. It wasn't formatted correctly. Calibri light, wrong margin spacing, no document code in the footer. That policy doesn't apply retroactively, and even if it did, this deal is already in active regulatory review, removing me. "Nothing personal," Cassandra said, smiling wider now. "Just governance." She looked around the table. No one met my eyes. 10 minutes later, my access to the live deal call was revoked. I watched the European seller's video feeds vanish from my screen, one by one, replaced by a gray placeholder that read, "Host has removed you from the meeting." At 10:17 a.m., I received an internal email from strategicops@vailedynamics.com. Subject, temporary access adjustment. Body, Daniel, per updated governance policy, your access will be limited pending review. Please stand by for further instruction. No signature. By noon, the seller's legal team had emailed Richard directly, expressing concern regarding continuity and authority. By 1:30, Cassandra was presenting my framework to regulators. I found out because she mispronounced Article 22. She called it Article 22A, which doesn't exist. I corrected her privately, quietly, sent her a Slack message with the exact language and a citation. At 2:04 p.m., she replied by CCing the entire executive leadership team.
Daniel's tone in this exchange reflects ongoing collaboration challenges. At 3:12 p.m., my system access downgraded again. At 4:45 p.m., HR scheduled a compliance clarification meeting for the next morning. I went home that night and opened my archive. Every email, every draft, every metadata timestamp. I learned early in my career that memory lies, files don't. I didn't know yet that Cassandra had already crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I just knew that if I walked away quietly, I'd disappear, and she'd take my work, my deal, and my name with it. And I've never been very good at disappearing. The HR meeting invite hit my calendar at 6:03 a.m. No subject line, just a time block. 30 minutes, conference room E again. By the time I arrived the next morning, my badge didn't open the executive elevator anymore. I stood there for a full 3 seconds, holding it flat against the scanner, listening to the dead click that tells you the system already knows your fate. I took the stairs. Conference room E looked exactly the same as the day before, which somehow made it worse. Same dried coffee ring on the table, same marker stains on the whiteboard that never quite erase. The room where nothing important is supposed to happen, but everything does. HR was already there, 2 of them, neutral colors, neutral expressions, the kind of faces trained to absorb anger without reflecting it. Cassandra arrived last. She didn't bring a tablet this time, just a single manila folder. "Daniel," she said, sitting, "thank you for being prompt." That was the moment I understood this wasn't a clarification meeting. This was a conclusion. "Let's begin," she continued, sliding the folder across the table, not to me, but to HR. "We've identified discrepancies in Mr. Mercer's onboarding disclosures." One of the HR reps opened the folder. I leaned forward just enough to see the top page, and my stomach went cold. It was a compliance acknowledgement form, my name typed at the top, my signature at the bottom. Except it wasn't my signature. It was close, too close. Someone had traced the motion, but missed the pressure. The downstrokes were wrong. The flourish at the end of the R was clipped. And the font, Calibri Light. Every executive HR document at Vail Dynamics used Helvetica Neue 11 PT. Branding compliance was mandatory, page 3 of the internal style guide. I'd memorized it years ago during a hostile audit. "This document indicates you claimed regulatory clearance authority you do not possess. That's a material misrepresentation," Cassandra said calmly. I looked at the timestamp in the footer. Exported at 11:42 p.m. the night before. I was at home. My laptop logs could prove it. "I never signed this," I said. Cassandra tilted her head slightly. "Are you saying HR fabricated a document?" The room went very still. "No," I said. "I'm saying someone did." HR exchanged a glance, the kind that says, "This is above our pay grade." Cassandra closed the folder. "Given the seriousness of this violation, we are terminating your contract, effective immediately." There it was, day 1. No warning, no investigation, no compliance officer present, which was itself a violation of Section 9.3, Paragraph C of the Ethics Manual. Any executive action affecting active M&A disclosures required independent compliance review. She'd skipped it entirely. I stood up slowly, not because I was angry, but because I needed my legs under me. "Am I free to leave?" I asked. "Yes," HR said quickly. Cassandra smiled again. "Security will escort you." They didn't, actually. My badge still worked on the stairwell doors. Someone had forgotten to deactivate that. As I walked out of the building, my phone buzzed. "From Vail Legal.
Subject, notice of restriction. You are hereby instructed to not contact any stakeholders, regulators, or counterparties associated with the Vale Eurosyn acquisition. That was the moment everything snapped into focus, because you can't legally restrict someone from contacting regulators unless you believe they still have standing, and I did. I was still listed as the external compliance architect on every regulatory filing already submitted. Removing my name required amended disclosures Cassandra could not file without admitting fraud. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I went home, poured a glass of water, and opened my archive again. This time, I wasn't looking for reassurance. I was looking for leverage. I pulled the termination memo Cassandra had uploaded to the system. Yes, uploaded, not emailed. I checked the metadata. Edited by C. Vale Admin. Time, 11:38 p.m. 4 minutes before the export timestamp. I cross-referenced security logs. Executive floor cameras overwrote every 72 hours, except the server corridor, 180-day retention, a relic from a breach lawsuit 5 years earlier. There was a blind spot between HR archives and Cassandra's temporary office, but not in the corridor itself. I didn't need to accuse anyone. I needed clarification. At 9:17 a.m. the next morning, I sent a single email, not to Vale, to the Federal Compliance Office overseeing the acquisition. Subject, request for documentation clarification, filing ID EU7742A. I attached my original time-stamped disclosures, and I waited. The reply didn't come quickly. That's something people misunderstand about regulators. They don't panic. They don't rush. When something feels off, they slow down until the silence becomes uncomfortable for everyone else.
3 days passed. During that time, I did exactly what Vale Legal instructed. I contacted no stakeholders. I posted nothing. I said nothing. Instead, I documented. Every morning at 7 a.m., I opened my archive and created a new folder labeled by date. Inside it, I saved screenshots of my revoked access notices, system logs showing permission downgrades, the HR termination memo, still in Calibriite, still bearing the impossible export code that didn't exist on the date it claimed to be generated. I printed the employee ethics manual and tabbed it like a law textbook. Page 47, section 9.3. Paragraph C. Any executive action affecting active mergers or acquisitions disclosures must be reviewed by an independent compliance officer prior to enforcement. Not after. Not as soon as practicable. Prior. On day 4, my phone rang. Blocked number. Mr. Mercer? A man said. His voice was measured, flat. This is Special Counsel Reinhardt from the Federal Compliance Review Board. We received your request. I didn't file a complaint, I said. We noticed, he replied. You asked for clarification. Yes, regarding discrepancies between submitted disclosures and internal employment records. Correct. A pause. Those discrepancies raise procedural concerns. I closed my eyes, not in relief, in focus. I can provide supporting documentation, I said. We already have, Reinhardt replied. What we require now is context. That was the opening. Over the next 48 hours, Vale Dynamics was forced to answer questions they couldn't dodge without triggering formal investigation. Why had the named compliance architect been removed without amended filings? Why did internal HR records conflict with regulatory submissions? Why had executive action been taken without independent compliance review? Cassandra responded the only way she knew. Process. She flooded regulators with memos, internal explanations, policy interpretations written in dense corporate language meant to exhaust, not clarify. But process cuts both ways. On day 7, Reinhardt requested server access logs. On day 8, he requested security footage from the executive corridor. On day 9, the board was notified. That was when Richard Vale finally called me. Not from a private number this time. Daniel, he said, no greeting, no preamble. Why am I hearing about this from Washington? I took a breath, let it out slowly. Because your interim director of strategic operations terminated me using a forged compliance document, and now she can't undo it without admitting she violated federal disclosure law. Silence. Then, quietly,
Is that true? I have timestamps, fonts, export codes, camera logs. Another pause, longer this time. Don't contact anyone else, Richard said finally. I haven't, I replied. Good. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. They didn't call it that, of course. Officially, it was a compliance alignment session, but they invited external counsel and a federal observer. When I walked into the boardroom this time, no one questioned my access. Cassandra was already there. She didn't smile. Her posture was perfect, shoulders back, hands folded, but her eyes kept flicking to the door, to the screen, to the legal counsel setting up at the far end of the table. The compliance officer opened the session. We're here to review procedural inconsistencies related to the Vale Eurosyn acquisition, specifically actions taken on March 3rd. He nodded to the screen. A single slide appeared. Metadata. Enlarged. Clean. Unarguable. Edited by C. Vale Admin. Time, 11:38 p.m. The compliance officer didn't look at Cassandra when he spoke. He looked at Richard. Section 9.3, paragraph C. Was this action reviewed prior to enforcement? Richard didn't answer. Cassandra did. It was an administrative necessity. We needed to move fast. The compliance officer finally turned to her. Fast or unreviewed? The room went very quiet, and that was the moment Cassandra realized something she'd never had to before. Her last name wasn't going to save her. Cassandra opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. I saw it happen in real time, the recalculation, the internal scramble. She wasn't panicking yet, not fully. People like her don't panic the way normal people do. They look for an angle, a reframing, a procedural exit ramp. She straightened in her chair. The in review was implied, given my authority. No, the compliance officer cut in. His tone wasn't sharp. It was disappointed. Implied review does not satisfy Section 9.3. He clicked to the next slide. Security footage. Grainy. Black and white. Time-stamped. The executive corridor at 11:31 p.m. Cassandra unmistakable, even in low resolution, heels in hand, walking briskly toward the server corridor door. The badge reader flashed green. She disappeared inside. The footage jumped forward. 11:44 p.m. She exited, heels back on, jacket folded over her arm. No one spoke. Not Richard, not legal, not Cassandra. The compliance officer cleared his throat. Ms. Vale, he said, were you present in the server corridor on the evening of March 2nd? Cassandra didn't look at the screen.
Yes, she said. I was overseeing an automated update. The compliance officer nodded once, then clicked again. A still image appeared, zoomed in on the termination memo. Calibri Light. Footer export code HRX771B. That export code, he said calmly, was deprecated 6 months prior to the date on this document. I watched Cassandra's jaw tighten, just a fraction. He continued, additionally, executive HR documents are mandated to use Helvetica New 11-point font per branding compliance. This time, Richard turned toward his daughter. Cassandra, he said quietly, why is this document in Calibri? She swallowed. It's a system default, she said. The compliance officer shook his head. The system default was changed in January. For this document to appear in Calibri, the style would have to be manually overridden. The air felt heavier now, like the room itself was leaning in. External counsel finally spoke. Ms. Vale, he said, did you create or alter this document? She hesitated, just long enough. I acted in the company's best interest, she said. That was it. That was the sentence that ended her, because it wasn't an answer. Richard stood up. I'd spoken to him dozens of times over the years, negotiated with him, watched him dismantle opponents twice his size with nothing but silence and eye contact. I had never seen him look this tired. Cassandra, he said, did you terminate Daniel Mercer without compliance review? She looked at him then, really looked. Yes, she said, because he was a risk. Richard closed his eyes. When he opened them, he wasn't looking at her anymore.
He was looking at the compliance officer. "What happens now?" he asked. The officer folded his hands. "Immediate termination with cause," he said. "Referral to federal investigators for disclosure fraud. The acquisition is paused pending remediation." Richard nodded once. "Do it," he said. Cassandra stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're choosing him over me." No one answered. Security appeared at the door, not for me this time. As they escorted her out, she didn't look back, not once. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. By the end of the week, my reinstatement was public, so was my role. The deal closed 3 weeks after that, with amended disclosures and a new compliance framework, one I helped design. My equity vested in full. Cassandra's name disappeared from the company website, from press releases, from internal org charts. It was like she'd never been there. A month later, Richard called me again, same private number as before. "You could have destroyed us," he said. "I didn't need to. Your policies did that on their own." He exhaled slowly. "Stay on as an advisor." I agreed. Not for the money, but because sometimes the only justice that lasts is the kind written into the system itself. So if you've ever been erased at work, sidelined, told to walk away quietly, don't. Document, understand the rules better than the people abusing them, and remember, titles fade, paper trails don't. If you've experienced something like this, let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories about quiet revenge and earned justice, make sure you're subscribed.